Well, welcome everyone. Today I'm joined by Dr. Dan Hartley, who I'm super excited to have a conversation with because he's been part of ASEA for, gosh, what, Dan, almost 14 years. Part of this sort of since the beginning. He's had insight on this. And interestingly, his background has kind of interweaved unknowingly with ASEA and the kind of origin story that we all hear. I know there's a lot of kind of folklore out there about, was ASEA almost bought out by a pharma company? Did they say no? Who was that company? And interestingly enough, Dan used to work for that company. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, but a little background on Dan. So he actually went to podiatry school with Dr. David Silverman, who many of you know. He's part of ASEA's medical professional board and has been with the company for a long time. I certainly have learned a lot from David over the years, but Dan went into practice and then left practice and went back to doing clinical research. Interestingly, he had, and Dan, correct me if I'm wrong here, but had worked at NIH in the 80s working on ACE inhibitors and research with that, which is amazing. That is, I know, helped a lot of people, family members of mine included. And after, realizing, hey, being in practice wasn't for you, it was more the clinical research side, you kind of went back to that and have been working in that space for several decades, right?
That's correct. Yeah, absolutely.
So I would love for you to share. Let's start with just how ASEA came into your world. What was your first impression with redox signaling technology? Had you worked with it previously? Did you have any understanding of redox? It sounds like you've kind of been at the cutting edge of several interesting things in science and kind of where science meets medicine and helping the human body. So what was your background with redox?
Well, I was introduced to answer your first question. I was introduced to ASEA by David Silverman years ago. At that time, he was evaluating it for his father, who had a health challenge,
Yeah.
and also I think he was using me as a guinea pig too. Uh, um, but as you mentioned, I worked at the pharmaceutical company that uh, when you watch that ASEA Genesis video and you see the jet plane in the hangar, the guys on that plane were my bosses, and the CEO was on the plane too. Um, they've since been bought out by another company. I don't know if you want me to mention drug company names here, but that was
Excellent.
the
I think
company.
people would be interested, since they've been bought out and aren't in business anymore. What was the company that you were working for?
Yeah, it was Bar Pharmaceuticals. They have since been bought out by Teva, who's in the process of being bought out too now. It seems like they they build it up huge and then they sell it for gazillions. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was Bar Pharmaceuticals, and I found that out after the fact. When they made their trip, I didn't know they were going.
Hmm.
Uh, so when David invited me to evaluate the redox molecules in ASEA, I was I was really intrigued because we at Bar they had been looking at this with a few different disease entities. So we'll stay compliant and not tell you what those were, but yeah, they just couldn't stabilize the molecules. They could not make them bioactive where they would actually have function in the body in the cells.
Well, that's fascinating. I want to kind of linger on that point for a minute because so many people say, like, well, I don't understand, why aren't other people researching this? What's going on? Why is ASEA so unique? So it's not that like ASEA invented redox. People were doing and have been doing research on this for a long time. And so it sounds like Bar was doing research for very specific applications, disease applications with redox, but was falling short because the molecules weren't staying active. So because they were
Right.
exposed to the environment and things would happen to just revert them back into saline. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah. And
So could you
it,
believe it, having worked on that, which is kind of wild, known that, this company was working on that. So that makes sense then that they were interested when they heard that ASEA was claiming they had actually stabilized these molecules. Well, I guess it was pre-ASEA, right? that these scientists and these investors, were working with something where they had claimed to stabilize it. No wonder they got on a plane and flew out there to take a look at it, and were interested in purchasing it because they knew, the power of redox and what it can be used for, at least for those specific applications. I'm curious. I mean, I know you didn't have a seat at the table in that conversation, but now, knowing what you know and having heard from kind of ASEA's side, why did that buyout not go through? I think this is like an interesting sort of origin story. The genesis of how ASEA even came into being was because, like, from my understanding, Bar made an offer. Like, they wanted to buy this technology, but ultimately, they said no to the buyout.
Yeah. Well, in my mind, I'd like to think that they had every intention of utilizing it for some of those disease entities that they were looking at. And I believe that.
Yeah.
Other people have speculated that they possibly were buying it to shelve it so nobody could have it. And I don't think that was in their hearts to do that. But it's a possibility because it's a disruptive technology.
Yeah.
And because of the work that they did at ASEA with stabilizing, it became very disruptive and could affect so many things. And the beauty of all this is that Vertus and his people and Tyler had the awareness and acumen to not sell it to them, because doing it and marketing it the way that they do through direct sales and network marketing, whatever you want to refer to it as, doing it that way, they're able to, as long as they stay compliant and follow the FDA rules of not talking about diseases and curing, that they could bring it into the lives of so many people. And that's why you have these results that you have.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It is. It's so interesting, right? We talk about like different timelines that could happen in life, and it's like there's different decision points that occur, and of course have a ripple effect from there. And it's like, well, had they gone through with it, right? And there's so much sort of almost folklore, right, about people saying, oh, well, they were going to buy it and shelve it, and so they said no to the buyout. But it's interesting having your lens of going, wait a second, I worked for Bar Pharmaceuticals. These people had good hearts, they had good intentions. But the truth of the matter is, if you're going for something to be a drug application, you then can only make a claim about that specific disease or illness with that specific sort of treatment, right? With the redox. And so, none of us can know. We weren't in the heads of Vertus Norton and his decision to kind of say no to that. But I have heard him speak about and others say that they realized that what they had their hands on was far beyond just one or two specific drug applications, and that would almost limit them. It would pigeonhole them versus getting it out to be able to be so impactful to so many for so many different things. And whatever went on during that time, I've heard also people say that they were told they were going to have to take their beta test group off of it, which was sort of like we can't do that. That's a non-negotiable, because it was helping some of these people so much. So it's interesting that the timeline, we didn't go down the one of specific drug applications. We went down the one of, okay, let's bring it to market in a different way. Let's get it into the hands of as many people as we can, and let's see the breadth of impact that this can have, which, 15 years later, we've seen some amazing things.
Yeah. Well, there's another aspect to it too. 15 years ago, the average price or cost to take a drug to full FDA approval was running somewhere between 250 to 300 million back then.
Wow.
And it's way more than that now. And so just that fact alone would kind of, it would make the pharmaceutical company decide that, I mean, we can only do this on one or two projects.
Right.
I mean, unless it's unlimited funds, but
yeah. That's an interesting kind of viewpoint, because I think pharmaceutical companies are almost like vilified these days, and they have their place and their role, and a lot of people working within them, like yourself included, and the people you work with, like, have good hearts, good intentions. They're doing what they think is best, and there's just these interesting kind of I guess the FDA puts things in the way that makes things,
Yeah.
cost the way that they do, but also, right, you want to have these roadblocks in the way to make sure things aren't coming to market that are harmful. So there's pros and cons to all of it. But it's so interesting that you were part of BAR, right? Knew this research was going on redox, and then years later, probably, I don't know, 5 or so years later, then ASEA is brought to you. So Avertis makes this decision. He says no to the buyout. He chooses to come to market through word of mouth. ASEA is formulated and makes its way through a series of phone calls and conversations to Debbie Wexler, who calls David, who calls you. It makes you kind of be his guinea pig. So tell us your story. Like, what happened when you started on this? Because I always think it's interesting, when people are kind of trialing it to see, well, is it placebo? Is this real? Like, what's going on? What happened for you that you knew, like, okay, no way, there's no way this is a placebo?
Well, David likes to tell the story about a few skin tags that fell off. But
He does. I've heard that story. Yes.
I don't like that story, that part of it. But the the weekend before, I traveled to one of the hospitals where we were doing working on a drug study, and I was in the hotel room. The weekend before that trip, I had burned my index finger
Mm.
uh, on an oven rack cooking a pizza, and and it was a nice size, let's call it a wound, and uh, I was in the hotel room, and I had put some of the ASEA in a glass jar, and I put my finger in there, and I immediately noticed some changes within a few minutes. And I called David all excited about that, and I said, "Okay, let's go."
Yeah, something's
Um,
happening
but
here.
yeah, it was try, trying to stay compliant here, but that was between that and a couple of skin issues. That's how I got started. And then I that was back when ASEA was just the liquid ASEA, the drink, and they didn't have Renew 28 yet. It came out before I kind of stepped away from ASEA. I didn't. I was working many hours a week and watching my kids grow up, and
Yeah.
I wasn't, to be honest, I wasn't a very good network marketer. I really wasn't. I didn't know really about detox too much back then, and there were people here in town that I introduced it to that had detox issues, and I didn't know how to get them through that. Um, I didn't know about the fact that we recommend people stay on it for 3 or 4, I'd say 4 months instead of three, like Dr. Hoffman suggested. I heard her say, and that's a wonderful idea. But because of cell turnover, that people need to stay on it that long. And back then, it was hard for some of these people working in the mills, and it's financially just to stay on something that they didn't see work right away, and I didn't know how to get them through that at the time.
Yeah.
Um, and I blame myself for that. But uh, now it's with all the products that ASEA has, and well, we can talk about the ASEA Gold in a minute, but with all the products, it's just wonderful and amazing. The
Yeah.
tools that you guys have.
Got more demonstrable. I was one of those that was having a hard time when I first started the ASEA because I saw nothing, month one, month two. I remember saying to my parents, like, you're wasting your money. What are we doing here? This is ridiculous. This is glorified salt water. And thank goodness, my mom had the conviction because she trusted her friend and she was going to some events where another doctor that David had introduced this to, in Annapolis, Maryland, was doing some events and talking about it. So my mom was getting educated and she was like, no, it's worth it. Like, give it at least 6 months. That's what she had made me kind of promise. And I'm so glad she did because it wasn't until after the third month that I noticed anything starting to happen. And then as I stayed on it, I saw more and more. But it's like, you don't feel things going on internally for a long time sometimes before you have a symptom that you're going to the doctor for. And, if we're talking about cells, like getting healthier and younger cells coming in, and we're talking about, that recovery aspect, it's like you might not feel that. Just like you might not feel when you're low in vitamin D and then you have high vitamin D levels again. Like sometimes there's just stuff happening on such a foundational level that you're not conscious of it. And you do have to be patient with it. And I'm so glad that, Renew 28 came out so that we had like a topical version of the liquid because you can see it because the skin's the biggest organ and there's so much you can see. And it's interesting that it was actually skin things that you saw with the liquid, right? It's like skin tags, going away, falling off. It's like that's not something you would placebo if you're going to placebo, right? You probably weren't even thinking about them. and,
No.
and then there they go. And then, with your hand, I always tell people like if you ever hurt yourself in the way that you did, stick your finger in some liquid ASEA and just see what happens. I'm not going to make any promise. I'm not going to tell you what to expect. I'm just going to tell you to stick your finger in a cup of it and just watch. Not that I want anyone to
Yeah.
go intentionally hurt themselves, but it's like accidents happen in the kitchen. If you have some redox right there, you'll see. My boyfriend did something similar to you on like his forearm. And he was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, this can't be real. I'm like, it's real. it's very real. When you can signal, the body can get things going really fast. So it's pretty fun.
Can you
Um,
can you imagine if you hadn't listened to your mom, where you?
oh, no, I sometimes I think talk about timelines and decision points, and it's like because the traditional sort of route with, my neurologist and everybody else, it was like you can take a prescription medication for migraines for the rest of your life, but you can't take too much because the side effect is more migraines. So you got to be careful. And, I was on like that medication made me so out of it, like, because it slowed my brain down. So I couldn't think, because it was like just a mess. And I'm like, man, I don't know where I'd be. I don't know if I'd ever been able to get a job again, to work again, be independent again. Like, I was told that I would be sensitive to light and noise for forever, which is like, you can't do much, like sunlight used to bother me. Like being on a computer screen, a TV screen, anything. I couldn't do it. So I have no idea where I'd be, and come to think of it, actually, I have no idea if you hadn't done what you did in that hotel room or had the experience you had, that David would have said yes to this. And if he hadn't said yes to it, it wouldn't have made its way into my life. I mean, how wild is that, Dan? I didn't think about that until we're talking right now. Like, that's crazy. Um,
It's
it's just,
called It's called serendipity.
yes, yes. Yeah. And I'm just so glad when this finds its way into people's worlds. I'm like, it does for a reason. I've watched it now for 10 years and it's pretty cool. And I'm kind of excited. Like I haven't gotten to know you because your life sort of took you away from ASEA as you were sharing. Like maybe you weren't the best at sharing it. And also like the clinical research is sort of like your jam. So you were, back out in the world doing that. But you had started a ripple effect with ASEA and you had continued. Well, I'll let you share the story, right? So what brought you back? Like what got your attention to go, wait, what's going on with ASEA?
Well, what happened was, probably first should mention that my wife's pretty skeptical and always was, and um, she's she was the chief of anesthesia at the hospital where we live, and when I first got involved with the CIA, she was very skeptical. And when I stepped away, and I've probably been away close to 6 years, where there are still some people locally here that I actually get it for them and
Mm-hmm.
give it to them
Mm-hmm.
that can't afford it. And then I use everything, but except the face mask, I haven't, or the skin stuff. I haven't done that yet. But
Gotta get started on that. It's pretty good.
I need to learn how to glow.
Exactly.
But yeah, so Debbie was pretty skeptical. But over the years, every week we received a check.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we received a check every week for all those 5.5, 6 years, and so she learned the beauty of residual income. And what happened was about almost 5 weeks ago, maybe, yeah, 5 weeks ago, I say, I noticed that my check was over twice as big as it normally was. And I was curious and I called Debbie Wetzler to see what's going on with this. And she said, well, we have a new product. And I said, oh, do tell. And she proceeded to tell me about the ASEA Gold. And once obtained some of that and saw that it worked on me, I said, it's funny. A few weeks earlier, I told my wife that I've been playing too much golf, and I think more than 3 or 4 times a week, golf can get old, and so this kind of gave me a new purpose to go share this with people again, and one last thing I would say about that, I was talking to Alan Noble last week on the phone, and Debbie three-wayed me in with Alan, and he said this is going to be the year of the return for people in ASEA 2025. So I'm one of the. I told him I'll be one of your statistics on the year of the return.
There you go. Yeah, well, and I hope more and more people do because it's like, I watch people sometimes get a little frustrated with the liquid or not being able to share it, right? They see the value, they're drinking it, but it's like was hard to sort of like an ambiguous thing to share with somebody where it's like, well, it's going to help your body where you need it and just track and let's see. And with the gold, it's so demonstrable. It's so like fast. I mean, within 15 minutes, most people are like, whoa, like I'm noticing. So then you can have the conversation about signaling where once someone has an experience, like totally different lens that you're looking at something, you're not wondering, is this real? You're going, why did it work? Like, what's going on here, right? You're digging in with like a different level of conviction and level of wanting to understand versus like the skepticism that your wife had, that I had, that a lot of us have about this when we first look at it. So I'm curious, you said the gold worked well for you. What did you use it on? What did you see with it?
I had two issues going on. I had ankle surgery done several years ago for a torn tendon, and it was repaired. And ever since then, I've had some discomfort when I walk. Not huge, but like a
There.
1 to 3 at the most pain on a 1 to 10 scale. And so that was one area. I put it on that, and within seconds that went away.
Wow.
The other issue was about 7 weeks ago, I had some rotator cuff. I had a procedure done on my rotator cuff. My labrum was torn, and so anyway, they did that, and there's still discomfort because it's so close to
Sure.
when the surgery was done. I put it on there, and it took a little longer for that, but I noticed that the
Nice.
discomfort went away. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, it's I had a similar thing. My ankle was like seconds. I had like rolled it and who knows, I probably should have maybe had it looked at more deeply than I did. Or you or David, one of my podiatry friends, looking at my ankle. But yeah, but the gold, it was like, I mean, seconds. And I went, whoa, is this real? Like I just couldn't believe it. Because the other places I've used it, it's taken longer, for me to notice that it's doing something. But it can work that quick. I don't know what it is about the ankle and down there, like why it's so fast to notice it, but I had the same experience versus my neck. It was
Oh,
like,
your ankle. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
the other thing, yesterday I got one more. I didn't tell you about this. Yesterday I woke up with a stiff neck because I was in the same position all night, and I was kind of couldn't move, and it was hurt. And I about 15 feet away is my gold tube, see a gold tube. I put some of that on, and it was like, okay, it was wonderful,
We're in
and
business.
it was quick. Yeah, it was quick. So.
Oh, I love it. Well, I'm so glad that you've come back around to ASEA. It's so interesting how sort of your life is interweaved with this from the pharmaceutical company to knowing about Redox to then experiencing it, getting the word out to some people, it getting to me because of the experience you had, and now, kind of coming full circle and back. Really grateful to have you back as part of the ASEA family and getting the word out about this. And any last thoughts, anything we didn't touch on that you want to share before we wrap up?
Well, we really didn't talk a lot about the science of it, and that's okay. But the thing that keeps going over in my mind as we're talking is that these molecules have been around since the first humans, and these are not new. It's just that we are learning how to evaluate and study them, and the whole field of redox chemistry is every day it's just expanding. There are tens of thousands of articles on it now, and I got to speak to Dr. Ostler last week too, and he opened my eyes to a lot of things. There's a couple of pathways that are in one of your studies that he drew to my attention, and it's just exciting times. There's more to come, so um, I'm just happy to be back and sharing this with people. And thanks. It's nice to meet you too and hear your story.
Yeah. No, it's so nice. Well, now that you brought up the science, so I
Mm.
should ask, in your words and with the background that you have, kind of how do you explain redox, what it is, what it's doing in the body, sort of yeah, and what do you look to as like the research and the science behind it that makes you like feel so solid about it? Aside from your own experiences, obviously you have a lens, you do clinical research, you know what to look for. Would love your perspective on all of that.
Well, we had back in the 70s when I was in undergraduate and going to college, if you looked at the Krebs cycle back then versus looking at the Krebs cycle now, we had to memorize it back then, and it was a chore to memorize it back then. But there are so many factors coming into and regulating all these different pathways, and how the reductive and oxidative molecules get in and out of the nucleus, the cytoplasm. There's a whole lot of uh, things that we don't even talk about with mitochondria outside of the cell. It's not
Mm.
just it's not just in the cell or then getting to the nucleus, but that's the focus and the main thing. But it's also there's a lot of different things going on in research with extracellular
Yeah.
redox mitochondria. So yeah, but I try to keep it simple when I explain this to people that these are molecules that are just electrically charged and they're changing every nanosecond in your body. But if we didn't have these, we wouldn't be alive because they are modulating and regulating the pathways of everything that affects us and everything we do. I don't go into the ATP and the energy and
Yeah.
NADPH and all that, but it's just yeah, I try to keep it simple because I don't want to scare people away, and yeah, but it's wonderful.
Well, I heard little birdie told me you're going out to go to the facility and get to meet the researchers and some of the people that are involved with ASEA now. And it'll be interesting to have that conversation. And I don't know, with what you're learning and sort of because what ASEA knew about their product back when you first started and what they know now, my understanding is they have dialed it in a lot further. Their research is much deeper. They have a better grasp on what they've got their hands on and the impact it's having. And I mean, that's why we were able to make a product that's so a significant impact. It's demonstrable for people, the power of the signaling. So I don't know, any thoughts on where things are going from here and what you think might be coming with the future of ASEA and with Redox?
Well, they're getting into that period where it's almost momentum time going to the world. And when I was in ASEA, it was just in the United States. I looked on a slide last night. It's in what, 37 or some
Yeah,
country.
we're all like all over. Yeah.
Yeah. That doesn't just happen if this is saltwater.
Yeah.
And so the sky's the limit. And for people who are just being introduced to this now, less than 2% of people in the world know about these molecules. And it's just huge opportunity for people.
Yeah, it is. It truly is with their health. And then also, as you and your wife have experienced with the residual income that can come from sharing, it's like,
Well,
it's amazing.
yeah, Debbie and I were very blessed financially, but I just feel the need to share this with people because of what it does.
Yeah. Well, I love that. It's everyone's motivated by different things. I myself felt like, hey, this came into my world for a reason. Like, how dare I not pass it along? Because I was looking for answers and had no idea what's going to come in a blue bottle. And the pay that comes from it is like secondary from what, there's like a
Yeah.
bigger purpose in life. And I think you feel that and have that. And I love that. And I am grateful to work with you and alongside you to get to know you more deeply now that you're re-engaging. And thanks for taking the time to come on here and to share. And, hopefully these words reach those that need to hear it. And I hope you have a beautiful day, Dan.
Thanks, Danielle. Great to spend time with you.
Yeah. All right. Bye, guys.